bomber that killed 22 people and severely injured dozens and dozens of people who were at the Ariana Grande concert. Turns out he indeed did travel to Libya, came back to the UK, also reportedly made trips to Syria, where ISIS is headquartered. He, of course, as I mentioned before, was born in the UK, but is a son of a refugee from Libya, and the father actually purportedly was a member of an al-Qaeda-backed group in Libya. So we're learning a little bit more about that. And also, it turns out that his brother knew about the attack, as far as we can determine, and has been cooperating with the authorities there in the UK. So a little bit more has come in that regard. And one of the pieces that came out through Mark Davis, who is a talk show host. Many of you have had a chance to hear him either on his own program or when he's covered for a variety of different people, whether it's Dennis Prager or Larry Elder or certainly Rush Limbaugh, actually wanted to take on three different words that we hear so often, or phrases that we hear so often, that I don't think accurately describe what some of these radical Muslims are doing. And he says the first is this term lone wolf. He said it's a term intended to deceptively suggest that terrorists are unconnected individuals, amazingly hatching similar plans by happenstance. Well, it is, I think, now no longer possible to call this individual who was a suicide bomber a lone wolf. If anything, he was a known wolf. That's a phrase that some people have begun to use. He was known to the authorities. And as I mentioned, some of the numbers that we've come up with are the number of individuals that are on some kind of surveillance right now in the UK is pretty staggering. The number for those in, for example, Belgium, which is where the president and many NATO leaders are right now, is even much higher. The second term that he wanted to address, in addition to lone wolf, is homegrown. And he says, this is an adjective designed to disguise the connection between all jihadists and the Middle Eastern cauldrons, he says, that boil with the hate that inspires them. And we've talked about this before. Homegrown, in one sense, true in that they, in this case, the Manchester suicide bomber, no, but in some of the others, did not travel to the Middle East, did not actually meet face-to-face with al-Qaeda or ISIS or the Islamic State, Hezbollah, Hamas, whatever it might be. But they are nevertheless influenced because of the internet. They can actually turn on their computer, become radicalized, first of all, on front of their computer, second of all, in the mosque, maybe where they attend. And so this idea of homegrown is sometimes a misnomer. And the third one, in addition to lone wolf and homegrown, is one that's sort of related, and Mark Davis calls this the phrase self-radicalized, which he calls a false description of terrorists as kind of spontaneously combusting with visions of innocent victims to kill, requiring no external accelerant. And so one of the things he wanted us to understand is that we have to understand that these people sometimes are influenced by all sorts of teaching, sometimes in their communities, sometimes outside of their communities. And so just wanted to kind of bring some of that to the table. A little bit later, I'm going to open up the phones to give you a chance to join our conversation, 1-800-351-1212. But if you opened your newspapers, we're going to work our way now through the latest CBO report. And that is, once the House of Representatives has passed a bill, as it has, with the attempt to actually come up with a repeal and replace. This particular bill, which has actually been passed by the House, is now going to be evaluated under the Congressional Budget Office. And so this is an attempt to try to get a little bit better idea of this American Health Care Act, what that might mean. Well, now that the score has come in, it allows the Senate to move forward. They've been holding some meetings, some daily meetings, to discuss the legislation before drafting its own bill. But the new CBO score estimates that the American Health Care Act would cut the deficit by $119 billion. And passing this test then allows those individuals in the Senate to move forward. But you wouldn't know any of that if you looked at the headlines of most newspapers. And I'll just pick one since it's a national paper, and that is USA Today. The headline for today was 23 more Americans uninsured. Now, you have to understand that in the context. We already have more than those number of people already uninsured. The lowest number I've seen is 24 million Americans are uninsured. I've seen in previous years it has been up in the 25 million, 26 million. I've seen one for maybe almost 2 years ago, 29 million uninsured. Now, the point that you have to obviously understand is that if indeed those people are uninsured, it's possible that a very significant number of them are uninsured because they want to be uninsured. I've had a number of you call in and say, right now I'm not uninsured, but I would like to be uninsured. I've had some of you call in and say, I'm uninsured right now, and each year I pay the penalty for being uninsured because I cannot afford the premiums. Lowering the premiums, which is certainly one of the goals here, is one of the issues, and trying to have a business model that makes some sense is another one. The latest blow for those of you in Missouri just came the other day when Blue Cross Blue Shield of Kansas City said that it was going to pull out of the marketplace in 32 counties, which then would affect 67,000 customers in Missouri and Kansas. So we have to understand that one of the big issues that many of you have been concerned about is whether or not you could even afford health insurance given the fact that the premiums have increased. So let me take a break, and I want to come back, and because of this evidence and because of some of the studies done both by the Congressional Budget Office as well as by the Heritage Foundation, we have a very good idea of how much those premiums have increased and maybe have a little better idea of what they'll be in the future. We'll be right back.
This is Viewpoints with Kerby Anderson.
We all know what happens when a Christian business promotes traditional marriage or fails to endorse same-sex marriage. Bakers, florists, photographers, and others have been fined and often put out of business. But would you believe this might happen to a company in the meat industry? Maggie Gallagher tells the story of a Christian family that runs the West Michigan Beef Company that they say is run for the glory of God. The owner saw various newspaper and magazine articles in the break room celebrating gay marriage, so he printed off an article explaining why gay marriage was against God's will and put the essay with the other magazines. Unfortunately for him, the Obama administration's Secretary of Agriculture had issued an anti-harassment policy statement. One of the USDA inspectors spotted the offending article and decided to take action. They told the owner that he must remove the article or they would withdraw all USDA meat inspectors. That would effectively shut down his business. Now remember that the USDA meat inspectors are there to guarantee the health and safety of workers and consumers. They aren't empowered to become the speech police for the federal government. That is why Maggie Gallagher says that Congress needs to investigate this situation because things have become confused. Possibly to cover their earlier action, the USDA sent a letter to the meat company talking about a possible violation of humane slaughtering, even though that doesn't seem to be a major violation. Is there really a problem, or is this merely regulatory revenge? Last year, I wrote a commentary about the list of vocations Christians might want to avoid. A few of them are baker, florist, photographer, pharmacist, innkeeper, and county clerk. Let's hope we don't have to add owner of a meat company to that growing list. I'm Kerby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
Take Kerby and the Point of View team with you on the go with the Point of View app. Search for Point of View Radio at the Apple or Google Play stores.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Right, once again, if you'd like to join our conversation, 1-800-351-1212. Talking for just a minute about the score from the Congressional Budget Office, CBO score. That is important because it allows the discussion to move forward in the United States Senate. And let's face it, the American Health Care Act is not going to stay in its current configuration. It's going to change rather dramatically, and we know that. But nevertheless, I think it's also worth mentioning just in passing, since the White House the other day said CBO is unreliable. Well, in some respects it is, because you're trying to guess how people are going to react to various kinds of incentives. And so far, the CBO has not always given us an accurate estimate on how many people would sign up in the Obamacare marketplace. And we're going to next Tuesday, when we have Dr. Merrill Matthews in studio, get into this in a little bit more detail. But one of the reasons why there has been such a push for something that looks like repeal and replace is to find a way to lower the premiums that many of you are forced to pay. Now, given the fact that the premiums might go down, some of the people right now that have said, I would actually be willing to be uninsured rather than try to pay those, might actually change this. But again, it is really difficult to estimate because, after all, these are guesses. They're educated guesses. I mean, they're smart people there at the Congressional Budget Office, but they're guesses, and we certainly don't know the future any better than anyone else does. And in some respects, the Congressional Budget Office estimates always have to assume a static model, which is not accurate. For example, if we reduce, as we're going to talk about in just a few minutes, the tax rate, the assumption is that by reducing the rate of taxes, the amount of taxes that will come into the federal coffers will be less. Well, sometimes when you reduce the tax rate, more individuals are willing to invest, more individuals are willing to maybe consider a business model where before the risk reward wasn't very great, but now the tax rate is different, so now the risk rate or reward rate is a little different. And so in some respects, lowering the rate actually increases the amount of taxes. But if you look at it from a static point of view, any reduction in the tax rate is always listed by the CBO as nothing more than a loss of income, and not always is that the case. But let's get back to this issue of premiums for just a minute, because the study now has helped us understand some very important things, and not the least of which is we were promised that the premiums would go down, and we all know that the premiums have gone up. Let's go back to 2008. President Barack Obama said we'll lower premiums by up to $2,500 for a typical family per year. Well, okay, not only did we not lower them by $2,500 per family per year, but we, in many cases, doubled them. And in a few cases, I'm going to talk about how we tripled them. And then even in 2012, you had the promise, you should know that once we have Obamacare, or the Affordable Care Act, fully implemented, you're going to be able to buy insurance through a pool so that you can get the same good rates as a group that if you're an employee at a big company that you get right now, which means your premiums will go down. And again, they did not go down. And so now when we talk about the American Health Care Act, there is an indication that maybe they will go down and that we will not begin to hit the federal debt as much because the deficit will be less. But let's talk about premiums for just a minute. Thomas Gallatin, writing the other day, talked about how in many cases the Obama administration, the Health and Human Services Administration, and in particular the Affordable Care Act doubled our premiums. And he says in 2008, he said our company's health insurance premiums cost $382 per month per family. Says we're a very small group. By 2013, as the Affordable Care effects were beginning to be felt, our monthly premiums had risen to $554 a month. And in the ensuing years, we've reduced coverage to keep costs under control. Yet to renew our plan this year in 2017 will cost a gut-wrenching $1,291 per month. And of course, he says we're shopping for the other options. The Daily Signal has 3 charts, and this is one we can post if you are interested, but it's just a reminder that when we look at the difference between what individuals in the individual health care market paid, the average premium for an individual health insurance policy back in 2013, that's just 4 years ago, was $2,700. Now it is $5,700. So this is because some of those very significant impacts that the Affordable Care Act would have on our premiums only were kind of back end related, and so in some respects only now are beginning to be felt, and were not felt in those initial years. They have an interesting chart, which again I would encourage you to go to dailysignal.com to look at this. 24 states had their premiums double. And you can start on the East Coast and look at Delaware and Pennsylvania and West Virginia. You can look at all of the South. So whether it's North Carolina, South Carolina, whether it's Georgia, whether it is Mississippi, Alabama, Tennessee, Louisiana, Arkansas, Oklahoma, all of them saw their premiums double. Work your way through the Midwest, Missouri, Iowa, Illinois, Kansas, Nebraska, South Dakota. You work your way to the west and you start coming into states like Montana, Wyoming, all the way to Oregon, all the way up to Alaska. And so you had 24 states that had their premiums double. But those of you that are listening right now that are in these three states actually saw your premiums triple. That would be Alabama, then Alaska, and Oklahoma. So when you see your premiums triple in just 4 years, this is why there has been such a push to try to come up with something different than the Affordable Care Act. Whether the American Health Care Act will remain intact in the Senate, whether or not something will pass is, of course, open to some ongoing debate. But it, again, is one more illustration of the push that we are going to see over the next couple of months, perhaps, certainly over the next couple of weeks, to try to find some kind of health care plan that allows individuals to purchase something that looks like insurance and at the same time addresses some of those other issues of pre-existing conditions, of people, that is uninsured people. But most importantly, one of the issues we've just talked about a moment ago is price. And then one more that we've talked about with many of our millennials, and that is portability. As we talked about even yesterday in our Millennial Roundtable, you recognize that we are talking about young people that are changing jobs on a pretty regular basis. Grant Skelton used his particular statistic, and I've heard different ones at different times, but let's use his from yesterday, that a typical millennial, by the time he or she graduates and then gets into his or her late 30s or 40s, will have been in 14 different jobs. Now think this through. If indeed you are not allowed any kind of portability of your health insurance plan, that means that you will have essentially 14 different health care insurance plans. Does that make any sense? It's all back to kind of a real interesting oddity that developed after World War II. And that is, after World War II, it was not possible, because there were some wage and price controls, it was not possible to really attract people to your business. So that's where, even though I can't increase your wages, some of the companies began to provide health care benefits. And then, of course, we had another time in which we had wage and price controls, and that was under Richard Nixon. And so, again, you had companies providing that. And so you have this interesting irony in that your company doesn't own your car insurance. Your company doesn't own your life insurance. Your company doesn't own your house insurance. But your company usually owns your health insurance. And there needs to be a way to disconnect some of that, also to allow competition to take place so that individuals can buy their insurance policy across state lines. As I mentioned just a minute ago, those of you in Missouri and Kansas right now are recognizing that Blue Cross and Blue Shield of Kansas City have decided that they're going to pull out. And you might say, well, then that leaves me even fewer choices and less competition, oftentimes increase the premiums, not decrease the premiums. So let's take a break. If you'd like to join our conversation, we're going to have a full discussion about this issue of health care and the ongoing debate about whether or not an American Health Care Act will pass in the United States Senate. But if you'd like to join us, 1-800-351-1212. When we come back, I want to talk about two other issues that are front and center, and that is Congress will also have to pass a budget. And so this is where there has been an attempt by the Trump administration, and especially by President Donald Trump, to actually identify a number of programs that he believes should be eliminated from the federal budget. and how his budget that he's put forward actually would decrease the size and scope and some of the very significant involvement and regulations of those particular areas. And then we also want to talk about tax policy. All of this may be a little more academic, but it's what affects your pocketbook and what affects the way in which you and your family survive. So we're going to continue talking about that right after these important messages.
If you've listened for any length of time, you've probably heard about Point of View listeners who've done amazing things, started ministries, found their life's calling, impacted their city, their state, the nation. But let me be clear, you don't have to have a huge impact to be faithful. I thought about that when I read a note from Joanne in Texas. She admitted, "Up until recently, I've not had much of a political view, nor have I ever been so informed. But since I signed up for your email and website information, I can now get the correct information that the public is oblivious to." Joanne ended by thanking us for the Take Action section of our website, where we make it easy for you to express your views on key issues with your elected representatives. Everything we do on the air, online, through mail and email is made possible through people like you who invest in Point of View so we can invest in issues that matter. Take your place on the Truth Team. Call 1-800-347-5151 or sign up online at pointofview.net/team. 800-347-5151 and pointofview.net/team.
Point of View will continue after this.
listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again is Kerby Anderson.
Let's open up the phones to give you a chance to join our conversation today. What about the American Health Care Act? Are you ready for something that looks like repeal and replace, or would you like to just simply stay with the plans that you have right now? Love to hear some of your comments. I read just from a few individuals talking about how they have seen that their premiums have increased dramatically in 24 different states. If you look at just the averages, premiums doubled, and in 3 of those states, premiums actually tripled in just the last 4 years. So if you feel good about what's happening, now many of the mandates and regulations are now just coming into being, and that's why I shared with you just a minute ago this story from one commentator, Thomas Gallatin, that said, in their particular shop, they were paying $382 a month per family. Then it went up to $554 a month. And that's enough for what you might call sticker shock. It wasn't quite a double, but now the plans that they're looking at the moment are $1,200. So to go from $300 plus almost $400 a month to $1,200 and close to almost $1,300 a month, you can see that many of you that are just sort of barely getting by right now or trying to figure out how you can possibly pay some of these premiums, and of course the deductibles have gone up as well, are maybe much more open to the possibility of repeal and replace than before. So I'd love to get your comments, 1-800-351-1212. But I want to move on to something else, because simultaneously the Trump administration has released its tax reform plan. Now, we've talked about this a little bit, but let me go into some detail and explain again why you're going to be hearing all sorts of criticism about it, some justifiable, by the way, I might say, but also why some of it simply relates to the fact that those people in the upper income brackets tend to pay more, so any kind of benefit are those who are already paying a very significant share of the tax burden. But it moves from having 5 different areas in which you have taxes to 3. And that's, I think, very significant, because I actually should say there's 7 brackets if you want to count all of them. So 7 brackets down to 3. So if you look at the lower brackets, like the 10 and 15% bracket, that would look more like 12% and have 0 capital gains. The 25 to 28 brackets would be 25%. And the 28 to 39.6% would be 33%. And so what you're going to see, and probably have already seen in a lot of headlines, is simply this. Well, it's going to benefit the rich. Well, it depends on how you look at those rich individuals, first of all, in terms of what kind of deductions they have, what kind of charitable deductions they have, whether or not they have mortgage deductions and the rest. But let's just for a minute remind ourselves that the more money you make, the more money you have to pay in taxes. And we really have 1%, the top 1% of taxpayers pay 38% of all of the taxes that go to the federal coffers. The top 5% actually pay 58%, and the top 10% pay 69%. Now, it's kind of hard to understand that. So let me use an analogy that actually kind of a story that I came up with today just as I was thinking about this. Imagine you're with a company, you have 100 people, and they're going to go out to dinner. And the CEO, who obviously makes more than some of the other people in the company, you're hearing all sorts of people complaining about how the rich aren't paying their fair share. And so just as a thought experiment, he says, okay, we're all going to go out to eat tonight, but I'm going to charge people on the basis of how we actually tax people under the federal tax code. And so there's 100 of us right here. And let's just make it simple. Let's just assume that these 100 people all bought a dinner that cost exactly $10. So there's $1,000 that somebody has to pay. And so he then numbers on pieces of paper 1 to 100, and then you just randomly pick a number. And so now he says, okay, who's got number 1? Okay, you get to pay $380. You get, in a sense, have to pay for 38 people, including yourself. Then he says, okay, who's got numbers 2 through 5? Those 4 people have to pay another $200, or basically $50 a person. Then he says, okay, who's got numbers 6 to 10? Well, you have to pay $110, so that's basically $22 a person. So you have to pay for you and at least one plus another individual. Then those of you that have numbers 11 to 25, you need to pay $170, which ends up being about $11 per person. And then from 26 to 50, you also have to pay another $110, and that works out to be about $5 a person. And so the ones that have numbers 51 to 100 say, well, what do we pay? You get to come in for free. And that gives you a pretty good understanding of the federal tax code right now. The top 1% pay 38% of the taxes. The top 5% pay 58% of the taxes. And as I said, the top 10% pay 69%. You go to the top 25%, they pay 86%. And by the time you get the top 50%, they've basically paid the taxes. And the other half pay zero. One of the reasons why I said I don't think I will ever run for Congress, and I know I would never be elected, is because I've always had a philosophy that everybody should pay something to the federal government. I don't care if you're under the poverty line, you should be at least required to donate a can to the food bank or give 1 hour a year for community service, because there is a real problem that we have right now in that we have a very high percentage of individuals who benefit from this country and give nothing towards it. And even in the plan that is put out by Donald Trump and the Trump administration would actually say that if you're single and you make less than $37,000, you will pay no taxes. If you're married and file a joint return and you make less than $75,000, you will pay no taxes. And so it's real easy to see where this is going, and that is a higher and higher percentage of Americans will not be paying taxes, and just the top income brackets will be paying a disproportionate amount. Now, obviously, they've made more, they have the ability to pay, but you can see the concern that I have in that we are moving towards a time in which we are trying to put more and more of the tax burden on those who are wealthy. But by relieving those who are down, in this particular case, making less than $75,000 a year. By the way, if you are, interestingly enough, in some of the higher tax brackets from $75,000 to $225,000, still there are incredible benefits there. So again, we are putting more and more on the millionaires and billionaires, the people with six-figure incomes and those kinds of things. And what it is doing is, I think, maybe even encouraging individuals to be less involved, because after all, if you don't have any skin in the game, then you really probably don't care. Or we have another situation, and that is where a very significant number of individuals who don't really have any interest in the tax code at all are every year electing individuals to Congress. And so as a result, electing individuals without any concern about the cost that various programs might have. And that, when we come back from the break, will get us into one other very important issue, and that is also, in addition to this tax reform plan, and in addition to the congressional debate about repeal and replace, is also the attempt by the Trump administration to begin to reduce the size and scope of the federal government by actually reducing its budget. Now, some areas of the federal budget will be increased. There's in the budget that was put forward by President Trump the other day, increases the Defense Department by 9%, increases Homeland Security by 7%, and also increases the Department of Veterans Affairs by 6%. But in many of these other departments, it actually is a decrease. Now, again, remember, when I talk about a cut, we're talking about a cut of an increase. So when we talk about a 4% decrease in the Justice Department, that's a decrease from the increase. I know that's complicated, but it's an important thing to keep in mind. When we talk about a 6% decrease in the Energy Department, again, that's sort of pretty much a cut in the increased. Then you get into the Interior Department of 12%, the Department of Housing and Urban Development under Ben Carson, 13%, Education Department, 14%. And then you, as you get closer to, say, the EPA or the Department of Agriculture or Labor Department, then you're actually getting into something that might actually be a real cut. When we come back, let me take some phone calls. First of all, if you'd like to join us, 1-800-351-1212. Also have a list, and we have made available to you this list of some of these various programs that Donald Trump would want to eliminate. And as you look through this list, I'm sure if you take the time to go to our website and find those, you're going to say to yourself, I didn't even know some of these existed. And some of them were implemented in the 1930s to deal with the Great Depression, but they're still hanging around. Ronald Reagan used to say, the closest thing we have on earth to immortality is a government program. We'll be right back.
Welcome to the First Liberty Briefing. I'm Jeremy Dice. According to the Fresno Bee, the Fresno City Council is considering adding the national motto, "In God We Trust," to the wall of the council chambers. But at least one local resident opposes the proposal. In the mind of one atheist protester, the delicate balance between church and state is upset entirely by the public display of these four words. And despite the fact that the atheist writes, quote, "Atheists like me feel the idea of God has little meaning," unquote, he encourages the local community to oppose a word which he believes has little meaning. One wonders how a word with such little meaning can violate the so-called separation of church and state, but that's another issue. Of course, if folks wanted to purchase the article in the Fresno Bee, they would do so with coins bearing the national motto since 1864. The City Council would be in good company with the United States House of Representatives, which has the motto emblazoned behind the Speaker's dais. And on the way to City Hall, residents may have to drive by police or sheriff's cruisers sporting the national motto. Throughout America's history, the national motto has been honored and celebrated as an expression of what it means to be an American. Any effort to prevent its display should be rejected as bald efforts to rewrite our history and destroy our heritage. To learn how First Liberty is protecting religious liberty for all Americans, visit firstliberty.org.
You can learn how to protect religious freedom in the workplace, public schools, your church, the military, and more by downloading First Liberty's free Religious Liberty Protection Kits at firstliberty.org. That's firstliberty.org. If you want hope for religious freedom, go to firstliberty.org.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
After a few more minutes, I might just mention in the second hour today, we're going to talk about the issue of abortion, and that is because we will have in studio with us Kathy Gray as well as Lisa Thomas by phone. And again, this comes at a time when we've heard from the Center for Medical Progress. They've released a number of new videos here, just again showing how individuals are profiting from the selling of baby parts from aborted babies. So we'll get into that in just a minute, but let's take some phone calls. If you'd like to join us, 1-800-351-1212. Stephen, thank you for joining us. What would you like to add to our conversation today?
Yes, I've listened to your program. I really appreciate it. And, you know, it's interesting how people who don't pay any tax can make their voice their opinion, but they're doing nothing to advance our country. And be honest with you, I guess this is a radical thought, but if you don't pay tax, you shouldn't vote. Why should you ever say so in something that you don't have any skin in the game, as they say?
Well, and that's why I want to go the other direction and say I think everybody should be somewhat involved. We used to have a time in this country, as many people know, where only landowners could vote, only males could vote, not females. I believe in universal suffrage, but I do believe that your problem you've identified is a good one. We are allowing more and more people who aren't paying taxes and are not making a contribution, at least in that way. Now, they may be making a contribution because they served in the military. They may be making a contribution because they're involved in their communities. They may be doing all sorts of things. So I'm not minimizing the contribution, but I'm saying if, as you said, you don't have any skin in the game, you are, in a sense, electing people that are determining how those people who do have a skin in the game, how much they have to pay. And it does seem to me that one of the ways that you can eventually bankrupt this country is to use another metaphor we've talked about before, when you have too many people in the wagon and too few people pulling the wagon. And I recognize that the small amounts that somebody maybe below the poverty line could contribute to this country are insignificant, but that's not the issue. I think getting you involved, certainly to even have to fill out at a 1040 EZ or something, would then cause you to pay attention to what's happening, and I think we would be better for it. But again, I know that that is a controversial idea. You've put another controversial idea on the table, so thanks for calling today.
You're welcome. Have a good day.
If you'd like to join our conversation, 1-800-351-1212. What about that? Voting and paying taxes. We'll get to that again in just a minute. But one of the articles I posted for you, I found this in The Hill, and it's programs that would be eliminated by Donald Trump's budget. Now, let me just, as I read through just a few examples of these, point out that there is very little chance that any of these programs will be eliminated, and certainly no chance that all 66 of these programs would be eliminated. But I wanted you to hear just a few of these so that the next time you see a headline saying Trump budget would slash programs, you'd say, and some of these programs, I bet you don't even know what they do. Let's start with the agricultural department. That wouldn't be cut back that much, but it will be significant, and it would cut back and eliminate some programs like the McGovern-Dole International Food for Education, the Rural Business Cooperative Service, the Rural Water and Waste Disposal Program account. Now, some of these programs, in the case of McGovern-Dole, go back to the 1970s. Some of these others, and we'll talk about a little bit as we go through some of these, go all the way back to the 1930s. We're not in the midst of the Great Depression anymore, and rural electrification has taken place. But let's go on. Commerce Department, the Economic Development Administration, and the Manufacturing Extension Partnership. How about the Education Department? The 21st Century Community Learning Centers. A lot of these came under either President Bush or President Obama. The Comprehensive Literacy Development Grants, strengthening institutions. There's just a long list here, and I would venture to say that even if you're in the area of education, you probably haven't even heard of some of these. The Energy Department, the Mixed Oxide Fuel Fabrication Facility. Housing and Urban Development. Ben Carson's been identifying some things that he thinks needs to change. One is choice development, choice networks and neighborhoods, the Community Development Block. Go to the Interior Department. By the way, Mr. Zinke, actually, there is a vote today in Montana to replace him. But anyway, he's got the Heritage Partnership Program. Under labor, you've got the Migrant and Seasonal Farm Worker Training. In the State Department, don't you love this one? The Green Climate Fund and the Global Climate Change Initiative. We've talked about some of that as well. And then some of the others, the Legal Service Corporation. Do you know that back in the 1970s, Howard Phillips, who was serving at that time under Richard Nixon, was trying to end the Legal Service Corporation because it was a way to just advance very liberal policies. They're still talking about it to this day. I mentioned Appalachian, the Appalachian Regional Commission, the U.S. Institute of Peace. I would have to say that as we go through this list, you probably have not heard of any of those. The only three that I thought most of you might have heard of that Donald Trump has talked about either trying to eliminate or reduce their funding would be the Corporation for Public Broadcasting, only because it has been making a profit. And in many cases, as I pointed out in one of my commentaries a while back, Sesame Street actually is produced by HBO. And the National Endowment for the Arts and the National Endowment for the Humanities, both which were started under President Lyndon Johnson. So anyway, I gave you this list of 66 programs eliminated in the Trump budget. I doubt whether any of them will be, but the next time you see a headline that says Trump budget to eliminate programs, you might look at that list and say, most people don't even know what these are. Some of them are outmoded. Some of them have stuck around simply because nobody had the courage to actually remove them and zero them out. And if we ever had a sunset law that said that you had to reauthorize every program, and every program we sunsetted unless you could justify its continued existence, a lot of those would have been gone a long time ago. Finally, the first article I wanted to post here is just something we'll get back to in the future, and that is, you have heard so many people saying that Russia has had an influence in the election, or there might be some kind of collusion between the Trump administration or the Trump campaign and the Russians. What I think is so interesting is you have a survey that came out the other day, and it's been reprinted in a couple of places, but I have this one from just the Media Research Center. But it was a survey that found something rather dramatic, and that is 55% of Democrats think that it is probably true or definitely true that Russia actually hacked the voting machines in the election. You know, when you hear these phrases that are tossed around all the time that say Russia hacked the election, usually what they mean is that they may have hacked Mr. Podesta's email and as a result revealed some information. But if you go back and look at this particular issue here and ask, do you believe that Russia tampered with vote tallies in order to get Donald Trump elected, you actually have 55%. And it turns out to be 22% definitely true, 37% probably true, believe that the Russians actually hacked the voting machines. Nobody is saying that, and it shows you why today it is important to get some good information, some facts, and I think, if nothing else, illustrates that some of these conspiracy theories have really begun to take off. So let me take a break, and when we come back, we're going to have in studio with us today Kathy Gray, and we also will have by phone Lisa Thomas. They are the authors of this book, Light in Our Darkness, Deception, Murder, and Unexpected Grace. It is, I think, a very encouraging story of their lives, but also of the pro-life movement. And those of you that are in the pro-life movement, or those of you at crisis pregnancy centers or pregnancy resource centers, I think you will really benefit from hearing them and probably would like to involve them in some way, perhaps in a fundraising banquet or in other ways, begin to tell the story. So we're going to have them in studio. And of course, as always, we'll give you a chance to join that conversation. 1-800-351-1212. We have all this information on our website, pointofview.net. We'll be back with more right after this.
Is religious freedom still a cornerstone of the Republic, or has it effectively been crushed by the forces of tolerance? America needs Christians to be informed and as unified as possible, applying God's wisdom to civic life. Point of View can be a key part of a successful mission. I believe in America. I believe God wants His best for us. We can face whatever the world throws at us as long as we stand together. If you have not signed on, please do it now. Support Point of View Radio today at pointofview.net. Set up your monthly gift by clicking the Truth Team 360 picture and then carefully follow the directions. Pointofview.net. By phone, you can give at 1-800-347-5151. 800-347-5151. Or mail that first donation to Point of View, Box 30, Dallas, Texas 75221. Box 30, Dallas 75221. Or call us 800-347-5151. Point of View will continue after this.
I just thank God for y'all. I listen to you every day, truly. I wanted to thank y'all for everything you do each day to inform Christian families and our community about the things we can do, and just the way you're so informative. I listen to you daily and love you guys and appreciate you so much.
God bless you, Kerby, for keeping this show so on track and for the decades of wonderful help to this nation that Point of View has been. We're all big fans of your work, and we pray that God will just prosper it.
As a Christian, over the years that I've followed this program, I am constantly challenged to be on guard and to evaluate what's going on. And if for no other reason, to protect the caliber and the truth of your programming, I need to participate and to back your program financially to ensure that the truth stays out there for people to hear, to view, and to be a part of.
This is Point of View Radio.
Hi, this is Kerby Anderson. You know, each day we take on the tough issues and provide a biblical perspective to them. The topics we cover are wide-ranging: apologetics, theology, prophecy, creation and evolution, intelligent design, marriage, family, child-rearing, the millennial generation, trends in society, politics, economics, business, religious liberty, the Constitution, public policy, foreign policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View continues right now.
Across America, live. This is Point of View. And now, Kerby Anderson.
Thank you for joining me. Second hour today, we're going to be talking about this new book, Light in Our Darkness, Deception, Murder, and Unexpected Grace. Just a fascinating story about how an abortionist really changed the mindset of these two women we'll be talking about, one in studio and one by phone. In studio with us is Kathy Gray. Grew up in Colorado. We're going to talk about her story in just a minute. And Kathy, it's just great that you could be in studio with us today.
I am delighted to be here. Thank you, Kerby.
Also want to introduce by phone Lisa Thomas. And these are individuals, I guess, Lisa, you grew up in Maryland, if I remember right. And we're going to tell your story in just a minute. So thank you for joining us today as well.
Well, thanks for having us. We really appreciate it.
This is going to be, I think, a real encouragement to our pro-life listeners. And as I mentioned just a minute ago, if you are involved in a pro-life ministry, maybe a pregnancy resource center or something of this nature, you might want to involve these women individually or collectively to come share their stories, because it is a powerful story. And it's all found in this new book, which is entitled Light in Our Darkness. We have a link to that by our website, pointofview.net. You can click on the picture either of Kathy or Lisa, and it will take you right there. And so, Kathy, let me go to you first. Growing up in Colorado, and being a bit of a perfectionist, I guess, is a fair comment, but nothing else. Tell a little bit of your backstory, because it's in the book, and I think it helps us understand when we get to this very significant testimony that comes from Dr. Bernard Nathanson.
Yes, it is. I do relate to Dr. Bernard Nathanson in a few things, in that I was raised in an academic environment as he was. His father was a gynecologist, right, and my father was a professor. And so I somehow adopted this idea that my performance was what made me valuable.
Right.
And in the book, you find out that you throw into that mix that I suffered from childhood sexual abuse, and unknown to my parents, it was something behind the scenes that they didn't realize was going on. And so my values started taking a nosedive as a woman.
Right.
And I kind of fell into that category that Dr. Bernard Nathanson, which we will introduce in a little bit, really had some compassion for. He just kind of went about it in the wrong way.
Right. Well, another thing I want to add to it is, of course, we've already talked about your abuse, but then talk about drug abuse, because your brother got involved in that. And so that's another very important part of the story too, isn't it?
Yes, it is, in that whenever an individual in a family starts engaging in drug abuse, that role in the family gets removed. That person basically doesn't function anymore, and everyone in the family starts scrambling to fill that position, and it becomes, we start taking on roles that never belonged to us. I started taking on an adult role quite early in my life, and I wasn't equipped for that. Gave me a very low self-esteem, in that, no 8-year-old is equipped to have an adult role in their life, and it was something that I took on myself. And so the whole family, there's tension, there's anxiety. How is this person going to get ready, better? How are we going to help them? And then the person in the addiction often doesn't have any interest in that. They're just fine as they are while they're walking out this addiction in their life. So it was a difficult circumstance.
Talking about the book Light in Our Darkness, Deception, Murder, and Unexpected Grace, and I might just mention there are all sorts of endorsements from people like David B. Wright, and certainly Jerry Boykin, who's been on the program. Brian Fisher's been on the program with us, as well as a variety of other people, Alveda King. And so those are individuals that have so understood that this pro-life message, which we'll get to in just a minute, is going to be very significant. But we had a chance to know a little bit about Kathy. Let me come to you, Lisa, because I know you grew up, if I remember right, in a Catholic family in Maryland, and share a little bit more about your backstory.
Well, it's amazing how you can grow up surrounded by people who love you, and Satan can still weave his way into your thinking. He is definitely the master of, trying to destroy and to get you off balance and to get you thinking in ways that are destructive. For me, it started when I was 5 years old. I just had this thought that I was a bad little girl. People say to me often, well, what happened to you? Well, nothing happened to me. I grew up in a home where there wasn't a lot of unconditional love, and it doesn't take that much for Satan to start weaving a web in your thinking. And then what happens is he starts to connect different circumstances that occur, and it just reinforces those thoughts that I was invaluable, that I was bad, that if anybody found out about the real Lisa, that they wouldn't want to have anything to do with me. And this started at a very early age, 5 years old. So, having that in my spirit and having different things kind of support that, different circumstances, the first opportunity I had to escape from those thoughts in my mind, I took it, and I started drinking. I was 13 years old, and when you open the door to that kind of behavior, it just manifests more behavior. And so it went from drinking to smoking pot, to having sex, and then eventually to becoming addicted to crack cocaine, which is literally the breath of the devil. It steals everything in your life, everything good. There's no boundaries. That was a lifestyle that I acted out in for about 12 years, actively using crack. And it left me homeless. It left me hopeless. It left me on the streets of Washington, D.C., prostituting and turning tricks to make money for my drugs, and eventually landed me behind bars. I am a convicted felon. I have... been in psych wards. I've been in rehabs, and I've had many different things that happened that just sealed that low self-worth in my life. And with the grace of God, I was able to come out of that, and that's really what we want to talk about. And we want to talk about the things that you do when you're in that line of thinking, and when that line of thinking takes over your psyche.
Let's take a break, and we'll see if we can get a better line there. But again, we've had just a little bit of a story here with Lisa, and this is just an incredible story. You read through the book, and individual that, first of all, spirals into drug abuse, and then prostitution, gets abortions, and just a whole series of other things. Of course, we're going to talk about light on the other side, and that is working with those individuals that are involved in re-entry. And we have in studio with us Kathy Gray and Lisa Thomas. And if you'd like to know a little bit more about either of these women, first of all, click on the See More button next to their picture, and then we have bios for both of them, and we have only begun to mention some of the stories there. But then we also have a link to lightinourdarkness.com. There's a place where you can see the endorsements, some of the media, where you could contact them if you would like to know a little bit more. And of course, you might say, well, how does this relate to the issue of life and abortion? Well, we're getting into that. And when we come back, we'll talk a little bit more about how this came full circle, especially by having a chance to meet someone that we've interviewed in the past on this program, Dr. Bernard Nathanson. So we'll talk about how this abortionist kind of changed their view about life. All that coming up right after this.
This is Viewpoints with Kerby Anderson.
We all know what happens when a Christian business promotes traditional marriage or fails to endorse same-sex marriage. Bakers, florists, photographers, and others have been fined and often put out of business. But would you believe this might happen to a company in the meat industry? Maggie Gallagher tells the story of a Christian family that runs the West Michigan Beef Company that they say is run for the glory of God. The owner saw various newspaper and magazine articles in the break room celebrating gay marriage, so he printed off an article explaining why gay marriage was against God's will and put the essay with the other magazines. Unfortunately for him, the Obama administration's Secretary of Agriculture had issued an anti-harassment policy statement. One of the USDA inspectors spotted the offending article and decided to take action. They told the owner that he must remove the article or they would withdraw all USDA meat inspectors. That would effectively shut down his business. Now remember that the USDA meat inspectors are there to guarantee the health and safety of workers and consumers. They aren't empowered to become the speech police for the federal government. That is why Maggie Gallagher says that Congress needs to investigate this situation because things have become confused. Possibly to cover their earlier action, the USDA sent a letter to the meat company talking about a possible violation of humane slaughtering, even though that doesn't seem to be a major violation. Is there really a problem, or is this merely regulatory revenge? Last year, I wrote a commentary about the list of vocations Christians might want to avoid. A few of them are baker, florist, photographer, pharmacist, innkeeper, and county clerk. Let's hope we don't have to add owner of a meat company to that growing list. I'm Kerby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
Take Kerby and the Point of View team with you on the go with the Point of View app. Search for Point of View Radio at the Apple or Google Play stores.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Privileged to have in studio with us today Kathy Gray, and also by phone Lisa Thomas, and they are the authors of this book, Light in Our Darkness, Deception, Murder, and Unexpected Grace. And if you'd like to know more about the book, we have links to the website, information so that you can contact them. And as you begin to hear their pro-life story, you'll certainly want to consider whether or not to have them come and speak in your church or your event. But Kathy, let's talk about, Lisa's talking about a little bit of her downward spiral. Mm-hmm. You had one as well. So let's, if we can, kind of finish that story.
Yes. So for myself, I was actually raised in a ministry home. And in that environment, similar to many people who grow up in the church, when you have these issues going on behind the scenes and you're just not sure what to do with them, you can often turn on yourself.
Right.
And then you try harder, give up, feel depressed, try harder again. And this is what happened to me as I was entering into adulthood. In my childhood, I had tons of nightmares. I thought there was something wrong with me. Wow. I couldn't figure it out. I just was a very confused person. But my husband and I, when we were where I actually met Lisa, we'd been married about 10 years, and I was pregnant with my third son. And after he was born, I had this complete mental, emotional, physical breakdown. Mm-hmm. I just quit functioning. I had been trying hard for so long to measure up to what I thought a good Christian was supposed to be, and I just was failing miserably in my own mind. Mm-hmm. I was not meeting up to the task. I wasn't meeting the goals that I thought I should be reaching, and I just gave up. And my body shut down, my mind shut down, and that's when Lisa really came to my rescue because she had been through so much difficulty. I didn't know anybody who'd been through things like she had, but I knew that she could relate to me and really help me out.
Lisa, in some respects, you became a caregiver, didn't you?
I did, and it was awesome. For once I could give something back to somebody else, and that's really what this whole thing is about, is giving things away so you can keep them.
Lisa, we can talk about radio for just a minute, because this is where some of this comes into the issue of the pro-life movement, and you were doing radio programs, so talk a little bit about that.
Well, you know that old adage that every journey starts with a single step, and I'm telling you, we could have never imagined the profound impact that one moment would have on both of our lives. We were doing a weekly radio show, and we did a month of shows on the sanctity of life. And we had a guest on who was introducing the man, Dr. Bernard Nathanson. Kathy happened to not be on the program that day. I was interviewing her by myself. And as she started to talk about him and to reveal some of the history behind him, Dr. Bernard Nathanson basically, single-handedly almost, introduced abortion on demand in New York. And he and a small group of people, NARAL, the National Association for the Repeal of Abortion Laws, they basically sat around a table and they devised a brilliant marketing media campaign. Sound a little familiar?
For sure.
And what they did was they basically came up with things like they came up with the slogans. It's a woman's right to choose. Dr. Nathanson said that they wanted to find something kind of sexy and catchy that people could latch on to. And they basically laughed about it as they came up with these slogans. It's my body, it's my right. They put out in the media, they would have people walking up and down the streets in front of abortion clinics and doctors' offices, babies and mommies with babies in carriages and holding picket signs. And it would appear that there was hundreds of people when in fact there weren't. They basically lied and said that the Catholics were for abortion. It was the Vatican that was against it. But everyday men and women who were Catholics were absolutely for it. And then I think one of the things that is really remarkable is that they absolutely lied and forged statistics, false statistics. Bernard Nathanson himself said that they just put statistics in the book the way they wanted them to appear, and in the media, rather, the way they wanted them to appear. So I'm listening to all this, and it's rare that that I'm silent, but literally I had an epiphany, and I realized at that moment that I had been brought up in the 1970s, and that's when this happened, early 1970s. It was all about, Helen Reddy was the women's national Star-Spangled Banner, I am woman, hear me roar. And we can do what we want, and it's just a mass of cells. It's just some tissue. And I bought every single lie that Dr. Bernard Nathanson and his NARAL buddies peddled. When I was out there in the lifestyle that I was living, I had multiple abortions, and I could never. It's like you ask yourself when you start to get close to God, and when God comes into your life, you try to come to terms with these things. And although I had never really understood the depth of the deception that I had bought into. And you see, everybody knows that your environment affects your thinking, where you are, who you're with, who you associate with. It all sends messages in. And I literally bought what they were selling. And I was absolutely blown away by this. I got off the phone, and I called Kathy, and I knew I had to call someone who knew me and who was going to understand, of course. And I called Kath, and I said, you have got to listen to this show. You are not going to believe this. And that really set the ball rolling for Kathy and I to research and interview people who knew Dr. Nathanson and read all his books and watch all his movies. And really the thing that came from that I think is the most compelling is that Dr. Nathanson started with the best of intentions. He really did. He started this idea of abortion on demand because he thought he was helping poor women who could not take care of their babies.
Right.
But that just goes to show you can start out with a good motive, and your environment and the people you're around and Satan himself, as I mentioned earlier about me, can invade those thoughts and the things that you believe are good and noble and turn those things around to be nothing but evil.
Kathy, I was just thinking that, you have to be deceptive because there is this inherent maternal instinct that a mother has, and you have to switch off some parts of your brain in order to even justify getting an abortion or multiple abortions. So Dr. Nathanson knew what he had to do in order to actually make his business flourish, right?
He did. He and Larry Lader were cohorts in crime in that sense. They really came up. Larry Lader was a revolutionist. And, I don't think that Bernie Nathanson at that time was really actually in touch with the fact that women were suffering emotionally. Right. I don't think he understood any of that. He watched his mother and his sister both be very dominated and verbally abused and so forth by his father, and that actually motivated him too. And he just pressed on with this idea, I am going to help women, but he didn't understand. He didn't understand the pain that he was in. He didn't understand the pain that women are in, other than the economic circumstances they're in. And as a doctor, he didn't want them harmed by illegal abortions that were done poorly. And, isn't that true about us as well? We're often unaware of we may have the right motive, but we're unaware of the pain in our lives and what is driving us to take certain actions. And, we just head down a path. Lisa headed down the path of drug abuse and alcohol to escape, to feel like she was herself. I went into the perfectionistic mode and just trying to be the best person I knew how to be. And that wasn't enough either. I couldn't do it. We were never created to carry these burdens. We were never created to carry the kinds of wounds that we have. And thank God we have a God in heaven who met all three of us, as we write in the book, and brought us out of that real darkness into the light of God's love and that unconditional forgiveness and acceptance.
We're going to continue talking about the light in our darkness, and if you'd like to join us, 1-800-351-1212. Of course, we have links on our website, pointofview.net. Again, Lisa Thomas and Kathy Gray with us, and we will come back and talk a little bit more about what kind of changed the minds not only of Dr. Bernard Nathanson, but both Lisa and Kathy, and how we can be able to begin to bring this message of hope and life to your sphere of influence. Let's take a break. We'll continue our conversation right after this.
If you've listened for any length of time, you've probably heard about Point of View listeners who've done amazing things, started ministries, found their life's calling, impacted their city, their state, the nation. But let me be clear, you don't have to have a huge impact to be faithful. I thought about that when I read a note from Joanne in Texas. She admitted, up until recently, I've not had much of a political view, nor have I ever been so informed. But since I signed up for your email and website information, I can now get the correct information that the public is oblivious to. Joanne ended by thanking us for the Take Action section of our website, where we make it easy for you to express your views on key issues with your elected representatives. Everything we do on the air, online, through mail and email is made possible through people like you who invest in Point of View so we can invest in issues that matter. Take your place on the Truth Team. Call 1-800-347-5151 or sign up online at pointofview.net/team. 800-347-5151 and pointofview.net/team.
Point of View will continue after this.
You are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again is Kerby Anderson.
Continue our conversation today. In studio with us, Kathy Gray, and by phone, Lisa Thomas, authors of the book Light in Our Darkness, Deception, Murder, and Unexpected Grace. We're going to talk about deception, going to talk about intimidation, but also when you talk about Dr. Bernard Nathanson for just a minute, I recognize that for our younger listeners, you may never have heard an interview that we've done on Point of View with him. And this is where technology really made a difference. Even today, we have the release of some of these new videos showing how Planned Parenthood affiliates were profiting from the selling of baby parts, and you've got all sorts of footage from the National Abortion Federation convention, all through the Center for Medical Progress. And for Dr. Bernard Nathanson, it was ultrasound. It was the sonograms, which he actually talked about the silent scream. And today, I have many times, Kathy, go to various pregnancy resource center banquets as a speaker, as a moderator. And I'll tell you, it is such a difference, because once Dr. Nathanson saw into the womb, we also recognize now that pregnant women who are convinced that they have a crisis pregnancy see into the womb, they recognize that there's a baby in there. And so a lot of this gets back to this issue of deception. And there's been a lot of deception in the pro-choice movement. You've talked a little bit about some of the facts and figures, but one of the very important themes that run through your book is this idea of deception. How are we deceived?
Well, we're deceived, I think, like we were in the garden, saying we don't have enough, that God isn't enough, and that we need to, with our own ideas, figure out how we're going to run our life. And, with the deception, particularly with abortion, it was sold in such a way, as Lisa so eloquently talked about, in that it just sounded so right. Well, it's my body, my choice, stay out of my body, stay out of my bedrooms, all of these ideas about, who decides, you decide. And it sounds so right, because we are to be supporting one another's individuality and dignity and so forth. But the reality is it's completely ignoring that there's a third person involved. And that's what got to Bernie Nathanson. When he saw the child in the womb, it was like, oh my gosh, I have another patient here. And that reality, like you're saying, for women with the ultrasound is one way to bring them pretty strongly out of the deception of that they're just getting rid of a problem, but it is easy for us to get deceived, especially through intimidation. And I feel like there's been so much bullying on the part of pro-abortion advocates that if you don't support abortion, it's like the litmus test now on whether you support women. And in fact, in the recent march for women, many pro-life groups who are very pro-women, Susan B. Anthony, who's pro-woman all over the place, but happens to be pro-life, they were not acknowledged. In fact, were told not to come, that they didn't have a place at the table.
Lisa, let's come to you for just a minute. We've talked about deception and we've talked about intimidation. I know you have some thoughts about that as well.
Well, I do. Just like you, I do a lot of speaking, and one of the questions I ask when I go to a pregnancy center banquet or any event is, by a show of hands, how many people have ever heard of Dr. Bernard Nathanson? And maybe 2 or 3 out of 400 to 500 hands will go up. And it's just amazing to me, because this is literally a missing piece of history. This whole abortion, the abortion on demand in New York literally paved the way for Roe v. Wade. And that was all documented. That was all, that was in the press. That was in the media. But Bernard Nathanson was basically blackballed when he started to want to rein in what he had unleashed on America. After he saw that ultrasound, he absolutely knew that he had to do something about the bad decisions and the bad choices and the bad things that he had done. And, I just keep thinking about that quote from Winston Churchill. Those who fail to learn from history are doomed to repeat it. And if you look at Planned Parenthood today, they're doing exactly the same thing that NARAL did when Dr. Bernard Nathanson was involved in promoting this campaign. And what happens is, as a woman, I can tell you personally, I had 5 abortions, and all of them except one were performed at Planned Parenthood. And there is not one time, not ever, not any other option was ever offered to me. Nothing. They never told me that there was adoption. They never explained to me what abortion was going to do. In fact, they were get you in there and get you out of there. And they were rough, they were insensitive and uncaring. And I'll tell you, if that isn't threatening, what is? You're in there scared to death, making a decision that you think is right, that people have told you is right. But here's the thing. It may be okay for a little while. You may be able to go on with your life for a few years. But I can tell you, at some point, sometime in your life, the decision to have an abortion will come back and haunt you. Because basically what an abortion does is it steals and rips away our God-given rights as a woman. It takes away the thing that God implanted in us. We are fertile ground. And, most women would die for their children. And the sad part of abortion is that your child has to die for you.
Yes. And again, this is something we've seen so often here on this program. We've done Point of View for basically 45 years, and I've done it for more than 30 years. And I can tell you that time and time again, when we open up the phones, we'll have people calling in and they'll say, I'm in my 60s and I had an abortion more than 30 years ago, but I'm still feeling the pain of it even to this day. Women exploited by abortion. But Lisa, for just a minute, let's talk about the political aspect, because you're saying there is deception. But this is another very important issue, because there have been a lot of states that have said, well, even if we can't overturn Roe versus Wade, even if we can't change abortion, we can certainly make it more difficult to get a hold of. That is a 24-hour rating period, informed consent, whether or not you have actual admitting privileges in a local hospital. And this is where the battle right now between Planned Parenthood and the pro-life movement is taking place, isn't it?
It is. And, here's the thing with that. I can tell you that if I had had an opportunity to see an ultrasound, there would have been no way I could have ever chose abortion. Never. It just would have not been an option for me. And, Planned Parenthood will do anything that they possibly can to push the envelope. They say they care about women. They lie about their statistics. I mean, this is interesting. I live in the state of Virginia, and under the previous administration, there were laws put in place that abortion clinics had to meet the same standards as an emergency room in the hospital. They had to have the same access to life-saving medical equipment and those type of things, the cleanliness, all that. And that was under Governor Bob McDonnell, who is a Republican, conservative. Our current governor, Terry McAuliffe, is a Democrat and extremely liberal. And one of the first things he did was go in and push for that to be revoked. And it was. So now, as a woman, you can go into any type of facility. There's no standard. They're not held to any medical standard, and an abortion can be performed on you. And that puts you in such danger and such risk. And then the other side of this is, if Planned Parenthood is pro-woman, then what about all the little baby girls that have lost their life because they're just an inconvenience? What about that?
Good questions. Let's take a break, and when we come back, I want to spend just a few minutes talking about what's available on your website, because I know that there are various resources, printable resources, opportunities for people to get a copy of this book, to use this as an outreach. And if you would like to join us, let's open up the phones, 1-800-351-1212. We'll take a call or two just before we end the program. And let me encourage you to go to our website, pointofview.net, and you can click on the See More button next to both Kathy and Lisa. That will take you to lightinourdarkness.com, and you don't have to type all that out because we have it right there, but there's an opportunity for you to find out more about their speaking, about some of the media, some of the contact material, and of course, if you'd like to get a copy of the book, we've made it very easy to get it there as well. We have their story and a variety of resources, so again, go to our website or go directly to lightinourdarkness.com. That is the title of the book, and it is, again, Deception, Murder, and Unexpected Grace. We need to get some grace back in here, although I think we've already alluded to some of that. But when we come back, if you'd like to join us again, that number, 1-800-351-1212. As you hear a little bit more about this, we would also encourage you to, again, maybe pass this on to others. We have a podcast. We have a video that will be on the YouTube channel. Pass it on to some others that need to know about that in case they didn't have a chance to hear this broadcast today. We'll take a break, come back with more right after this.
Welcome to the First Liberty Briefing. I'm Jeremy Dice. According to the Fresno Bee, the Fresno City Council is considering adding the national motto, "In God We Trust," to the wall of the council chambers. But at least one local resident opposes the proposal. In the mind of one atheist protester, the delicate balance between church and state is upset entirely by the public display of these 4 words. And despite the fact that the atheist writes, quote, "Atheists like me feel the idea of God has little meaning," unquote, he encourages the local community to oppose a word which he believes has little meaning. One wonders how a word with such little meaning can violate the so-called separation of church and state, but that's another issue. Of course, if folks wanted to purchase the article in the Fresno Bee, they would do so with coins bearing the national motto since 1864. The City Council would be in good company with the United States House of Representatives, which has the motto emblazoned behind the Speaker's dais. And on the way to City Hall, residents may have to drive by police or sheriff's cruisers sporting the national motto. Throughout America's history, the national motto has been honored and celebrated as an expression of what it means to be an American. Any effort to prevent its display should be rejected as bald efforts to rewrite our history and destroy our heritage. To learn how First Liberty is protecting religious liberty for all Americans, visit firstliberty.org.
You can learn how to protect religious freedom in the workplace, public schools, your church, the military, and more by downloading First Liberty's free Religious Liberty Protection Kits at firstliberty.org. That's firstliberty.org. If you want hope for religious freedom, go to firstliberty.org.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Back for a few more minutes. We have in studio with us today Kathy Gray as well as Lisa Thomas. And if you'd like to join us, 1-800-351-1212. Let's head out to Nevada, first of all. Janet, thank you for joining us today here on Point of View.
Hi.
Yes, what would you like to add to our conversation?
I just have a question. I understand the point of not having abortions because I wouldn't want anyone to have an abortion. But my question is, so if the young ladies or ladies decide to keep their child and they don't want to give it up for adoption, what would be in place to help them if they cannot afford to raise the child? Because here already in America, there's a lot of children that need homes and families, and with the present administration, there's a lot of things that are being taken away from people that need help. So what would be the solution to help them?
Good. Would you like to, Kathy, go ahead.
It's an excellent question, and I really appreciate your heart for the woman who's in a crisis situation. The reality is that there are many, many organizations around the country and churches who are providing not only help through the pregnancy, but for years after. And with siblings, there's they connect them with all programs that will help them. They connect them. Human Coalition, who is headquartered here, is
CareNet and things
CareNet.
like that. Mm-hmm.
Yes, around the nation there are many, many avenues of providing, and they don't just provide for the pregnancy and say, "Great, you didn't have an abortion, now have a good life." They have diapers and clothing and medical care, and they help them with further education and so forth. So it's an excellent question. And, if I could just take you a little deeper than that question, and you said you didn't want anyone to have an abortion. I think abortion at its very core is a total lack of hope for the future.
Right.
And we don't know what's going to happen with that child after they're born. But if we take away the life before they're ever born, that is truly saying there's no hope, and I'm not even going to give you a chance to see what God might provide for your life.
One of the things I might ask to that, Lisa, is we have more pregnancy resource centers in America than we have abortion clinics. So there is a network that did not exist a number of years ago when you got your 5 abortions.
Absolutely. I mean, just in my local town, there's a pregnancy center that started, a home for pregnant women. They started with one home, Mary Shelter, and they have got 5 now. So even in individual communities, this type of help is popping up because I think a lot of it is that, women are starting to realize that just because that baby is 6 inches out of sight does not mean that they don't have value. I mean, our book also encompasses even more than the unborn. I mean, we talk about, from the womb to the tomb, from the crack house to the state house, from the suburbs and the city, the elderly, the mentally ill, the addict, the prisoner. There's so many people who are just considered disposable, that they have no value, that they're not important to society. And our job is never to decide someone's value. Our job is to love one another. That's what the Lord has told us to do. And, one of the reasons that Kathy and I wrote this book was to provide from our own struggles a tangible example of hope. And when you are in Christ, as it says in Isaiah 61, if we're in Christ, we've been anointed to bring good news, to set the captives free, to comfort the brokenhearted. We are able to help with shame and dishonor. And the Lord has commanded us to do that. So many people say, well, what can I do? Well, I'll tell you something. With somebody, encouraging somebody, this sweet lady that just called in. I'm so grateful that that people have the one thing, they may be confused in how some of these things work out, but I believe America and the American people are genuinely good at heart, and that their heart is for people. It's just so many mixed messages that we get, and so many things that we have to filter through.
Before we run out of time here, Kathy, talk about what's available at lightinourdarkness.com. If people wanted to contact you or get a copy of the book or get some of the other resources, what's available?
Yes. On lightinourdarkness.com, you will find an avenue to get our book. You can just click there. You can also click on Lisa's bio or mine and see all of the different things that we actually do speak about besides just pro-life. Mm-hmm. Lisa is a veteran in reentry and encouraging those that are in prison. And we both have been in 12-step recovery and help people with addictions. And I personally was the parent of a son or two that struggled with cocaine addiction and alcoholism. So there's a lot of resources there.
And again, I might just mention there's a video there, which is the interview that they did on CBN with Lisa. So, Lisa, there's a place for people to watch the video. It's about 13 minutes long, and we oftentimes encourage people to watch a video, then click the share button and put it on your Facebook page or send it to someone, and that would be another way that they could learn a little bit more. And of course, we have the podcast today as well as the video. So these are some ways in which people might know a little bit more about the ministry that you've developed.
Yes, thank you. Absolutely. We so appreciate that. And I think that that's basically the idea is to get involved, get connected.
So again, Kathy, just before we run out of time, again, the book is entitled Light in Our Darkness. And if somebody wanted to have you come and speak or get multiple copies of the book or some other things, what's available through the various websites that we have provided today?
Yeah, I think the best place to go is lightinourdarkness.com. And that will also connect you with our Speakers Bureau, and you can get multiple copies. I will tell you that this book is so interesting because it's a page turner. You keep wanting to find out what's going to happen next. So it engages people. And if you have someone who's on the fence about abortion or is very pro-abortion, it's an excellent way to introduce them into some of the deception behind the thinking and get them to think about their own thinking and recognize what's really inside of them. We're really digging for the gold in people that's already there. We just want to bring it up to the surface.
And again, I don't think anybody reading this book can come away saying, well, you really don't understand my problem. They're going to say, you've got more problems than I've ever heard of. You know, we're talking about drug abuse. We're talking about sexual abuse. We're talking about recovery. We're talking about prison. We're talking about prostitution. You definitely check all the boxes. So, Lisa, thank you for joining us by phone. And Kathy, thank you for being in studio with us today.
Thank you so much, Kerby.
Thank you so much for having us.
One more time, the book is entitled Light in Our Darkness. It is a page turner, and you will certainly enjoy the conversation that we have had, and you will enjoy reading more about that because we've only just skimmed the surface of some of the very important things in the book. And for those of you in the pro-life movement, and I know there are many of you, especially if you're in a pregnancy resource center and you're saying, well, next time we have a banquet, wouldn't it be good to have Lisa or Kathy to come? Or maybe you are maybe wanting to testify before a state legislature about this issue of life or something like this. They would certainly be resources that you would want to have access to. So again, take the time to visit our website, and it will take you to Light in Our Darkness. And again, it's been great to have you in studio. I want to thank those behind the scenes that have made this program possible, and that is Andrew and Lisa and Melissa, as well as Shamila. There have been a number of people that have made this program possible, and so I hope you've appreciated this conversation. Tomorrow is our Friday weekend edition right here at Point of View. We'll see you then.
Is religious freedom still a cornerstone of the Republic, or has it effectively been crushed by the forces of tolerance? America needs Christians to be informed and as unified as possible, applying God's wisdom to civic life. Point of View can be a key part of a successful mission. I believe in America. I believe God wants His best for us. We can face whatever the world throws at us as long as we stand together. If you have not signed on, please do it now. Support Point of View Radio today at pointofview.net. Set up your monthly gift by clicking the Truth Team 360 picture and then carefully follow the directions. Pointofview.net. By phone, you can give at 1-800-347-5151. 800-347-5151. Or mail that first donation to Point of View, Box 30, Dallas, Texas 75221. Box 30, Dallas 75221. Or call us 800-347-5151. Point of View is produced by Point of View Ministries.
I just thank God for y'all. I listen to you every day, truly. I wanted to thank y'all for everything you do each day to inform Christian families and our community about the things we can do, and just the way you're so informative. I listen to you daily and love you guys and appreciate you so much.
God bless you, Kerby, for keeping this show so on track and for the decades of wonderful help to this nation that Point of View has been. We're all big fans of your work, and we pray that God will just prosper it.
As a Christian, over the years that I've followed this program, I am constantly challenged to be on guard and to evaluate what's going on. And if for no other reason, to protect the caliber and the truth of your programming, I need to participate and to back your program financially to ensure that the truth stays out there for people to hear, to view, and to be a part of.
This is Point of View Radio.